All right, so this is the Des Moines user group. Let's get flowing, and we are just going to get right into it since we had some troubles getting connected here. So let's just remember to keep yourself muted unless you've got a question. Also, you can post your questions in the chat window. That will be monitored by both Carla and I today to answer questions as they come up. If we do have time at the end, we'll have a Q&A at the end of this as well. I think all of you have your names pretty clearly identified. If not, Carla will probably reach out to you and ask who you are so that we can count you on the attendance. And so for this particular one, we're doing the cloning a parent and child record using Flow, and Clarissa is volunteered to lead this session. So I'm super excited to hear, learn from her. I built a sample of this out, and she looked at it and says, I think we can do that a little bit better. So it's like, I'm happy to see that. So she's an expert with flows and certainly knows it far better than I do. And so I'm really happy to have her leading this session today. So the flow that we're going to build out is cloning parent and child. We will cover some basic things with the flow builder again, some concepts and best practices. As we're building the flow, you're going to learn about variables, getting records, creating records, how to loop through multiple records. We're going to deal with some assignment screens. What happens if we have an error in the process? So we have some flow faults that we'll look at, and then of course the activating the flow. This particular flow is going to get kicked off from a button that's placed on the screen, and then we'll show you how you can debug the flow as well if we have time there at the end. Our use case is we are pretending to be a food manufacturing company, and we provide samples to potential customers. And so we want to be able to track those sample requests in two custom objects. One of them is called sample request. The other is the sample request product. So in the org that you're going to see are these two custom objects. It's similar to like an opportunity and opportunity line items, but they are custom objects, and it allows you to choose a product that goes into the child record. So we're going to see some existing records, clone the parent, and it will also then clone the child records along with it. Sorry about that. Let's go back to where I was, hopefully. There we go. And like I mentioned, this flow is going to get kicked off from a button that's going to be on that sample request screen. So Clarissa has some best practices that she likes to, and I'm going to turn it over to her now. So I am going to stop sharing, Clarissa, and I'll let you unmute and share your screen and take over from here. So thank you again.
Okay. So I don't have that same slide that Terry had. That's so beautiful.
Oh, you want me to keep it up? Sorry.
Yeah. Why don't you just keep that up, and I'll talk to it, and then I'll take over and share, if that's okay.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so these are some best practices that I find work well for me. These are in addition to the Salesforce best practices. So a few things that I find are really helpful are adding descriptions to each element, and I'll talk about these as I go in and build the flow. I didn't used to think that adding descriptions to each element was important until I started working in an org with multiple admins. And then you learn that it's really helpful for other people to know why you built the flow the way you did. So that's one of them. The next one is to use concise but descriptive flow names. So for example, if you build a flow and you just call it submit case flow, that's fine until you have 40 flows and you need to find one related to the case. So in my org, I do like the main object and then a pipe and then the function of the flow. So it would be like case, pipe, submit, case, or something like that. Also, I recommend trying to limit the number of elements in your flow. So it was like one of the changes I made to the original flow Terry had built for this was I just cleaned it up a little bit and made it more concise just so it's easier to see. Excuse me. When you're doing a screen flow, always include a fault screen. Otherwise, your users will not know if what they did worked. So adding a fault screen is imperative. So of course, we'll talk about that today as well. Another big one is to use end user friendly words on your screens, especially your success screen and your fault screen. It's okay to have fun with it. Actually, in the Vertex org, we have, so this is awkward on the fault screen. So you don't have to be super, well, depending on the culture of your company, you don't have to be super formal with it. But it does help if you use language that says like, oh, something went wrong. We've notified your administrators. If this is urgent, please reach out to them immediately. And then the last best practice I personally use is when you're saving a new version of your flow, include the changes you made in the description. And then it's easier for you and other admins to know which version of the flow you need to update, especially if it's a flow that you can't debug easily and you actually have to activate it and then make changes. It can be a lot easier to know what version of the flow you need to be starting with any updates you're making. So those are Carissa's best practices for flow. And I talk fast, so I'm sorry if I just blaze through that. Okay, I will share my screen now. Screen option. Terry, do you need to make me the presenter?
No, at the bottom of the flow of the, I'm sorry, the Zoom meeting should be a
oh, there it is.
Buttons.
I just missed it. It's fine. It's one of those days. Okay, I will share this window. Okay. So this is the sample request record that we are going to be cloning. Our ultimate goal is to have this button that we click clone. It makes a new record. So if I go over here to my tab, and let's see, it should be this one. So here it is, and it's exactly the same as the one I cloned it from. So this is what we're working towards. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, of course, is go into Flow Builder, which I already have open in an effort to expedite time. And we're going to make a screen flow. Buttons always have to be screen flows. So we will make a screen flow. All right. And the first thing we're going to do, I can readjust my other window here. All right, we need to get all the values from the source record that we're going to clone. So we're going to grab a get records, and we're going to name it using our naming convention. I'm going to do this, and because I like to always put a description in here, I'm going to say get values from source sample request. And then we're going to get objects of the sample request. We'll get records of the sample request object. And the condition we need is ID equals, and then we're going to build a new resource. So we're going to build an input variable. And this is a fantastic little bit of magic that Salesforce developed that excited probably everyone who relied on process automation, which is you can just create this beautiful little variable called record ID. You make it an input variable, and Salesforce will auto-magically pass the ID of whatever record is triggering this automation into this variable. So there's your Salesforce magic for the day. And that's the only criteria we need. And we're only going to pull the first record, and we're going to go ahead and have Salesforce automatically store all fields. Okay, we'll go ahead and connect this to our start element. And hopefully I can get the lines straight, which has been a little difficult with the trackball mouse I'm using. So I'm sorry if I don't have straight lines and it bothers you. Okay, so the next thing that I would do is then create a record. So doing a bad job of copying and pasting correctly. That's okay. All right. So we're going to create a new sample request. We're going to say create new sample request record from source record. Okay, we're only going to create one. And in this instance, we're going to use separate resources and literal values. And I want to create a sample request record. And now we're going to assign the values based on the prior element. So for account, I'm going to grab that record that I pulled in my get records step. So that's what this is. Salesforce automatically created a single record variable, which is the technical term, but really what it is Salesforce has created a way for me to just go grab the field values. So we're going to click into that, and then we're going to grab account. We're going to grab account __ C and not account __ R. The __ R is, of course, fields on the account. This is also a recent feature of Flow where you can actually dig deep into the record relationships, but we don't need to do that today. So we're just going to grab account. And we're also going to grab order date. And I like to cheat and start typing things because I find it helps me move faster instead of clicking through things. So you can click if you're a clicker, or you can type if you're a typer. And it doesn't matter what order you put these on here. When you save it and close out of your flow, Salesforce should put it in alphabetical order. At least it does in my experience. So just go through here. Postal code. Oops. State. And you'll see that it's limiting the fields I have as I'm assigning these because I can only assign one value per each field. On the left side. Of course, on the right side, I can just keep picking the same field if I wanted to assign the same thing to every field I could, but that wouldn't be very good data now, would it? Streets. And just need status. So requested. All right, and then the last thing we're gonna do is check this manually assigned variables. And all this is to grab the ID of the record we're creating. So I'm going to create a new resource, variable, and I'm going to call it variable new sample request ID. And we'll make it text. And that's all we need to do. So it's going to store the ID in this variable so I can use it later on in my flow. Okay, so that was step 2.
Before you leave that page, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Can you open that back up? You chose to name the variables as opposed to letting Salesforce do that. Up at the
here?
Up higher.
Up higher.
Yep, up above, how to set the record fields. Can you talk to us why in this particular case we would do that versus using all the values from the records?
So it depends on how you want to work with the values. You can do it either way. And in this instance, hopefully I can explain this in a way that makes sense. So we created a single record variable when we created our get records element. That created the get this record, and it stored every single field in that record. The conundrum then becomes you cannot use that same single object record variable when you're creating a record, because the create records element always expects there to be no ID. And because we grabbed an already existing record, it already has an ID, and that can just cause some chaos. So we could have added an assignment action and assigned these, essentially followed the same process and assigned the value from the get record to a new SObject record variable and just assign them that way, and then clicked this. That's another way we could have done this. My preference, like I said, is to have fewer elements. So I would have done it this way and just grabbed those individual values. And of course, it's Salesforce, so there are 40 zillion different ways to accomplish the same thing. So this is how I would do it, but there are other ways.
Yeah, I think the big, you hit on what I was looking for there. The ID of the original record can't be on this new one that we're creating.
Right.
And that's why we're picking and choosing the fields that we want to assign here. So
Yes.
yeah, perfect.
And we can actually, I think, see that in action just as a demonstration. If I pulled this over and told it to use all values from a record, we even get this message to make sure that the ID is blank. So if you forget that and you want to try to make it easy for yourself, Salesforce will remind you that you can't have an ID in your record variable if you're creating records. Okay. So now we've created our new sample request record. And the next thing we want to do, because we also want to clone our child records, is we're going to get all of those child records. So we'll drag over a get records. So when we were getting the sample request, we were only getting one record because that was all we needed. So we'll say get request products. Oops. Okay, and we want sample product. Hop down here real quick just to say that, so last time we were only getting the first record. This time we want all the records because we want all of the sample request products that are associated to our source sample request. So in this instance, we can just use record ID again. Okay, and we're gonna have Salesforce automatically store all fields. We don't really care about sorting because we're grabbing all the records anyway. And then we'll click done. All right, so we'll drag these two together. You'll see I'm kind of like moving these around. I have found that every person has a different way that it makes sense to organize their flow. So it's easiest if you kind of group things based on the stage of the flow, but your mileage may vary on that. So, all right. And then the next thing we're going to do is a loop. So what a loop does is it goes through everything in a collection variable. So you're more often than not, you're going to be using a loop when you have a collection of records. Loops are an incredibly powerful tool. In this case, we're doing something fairly simple with them, and that's fine, but you can do more complex things. The most important thing to remember with loops is you never, ever, ever put a loop inside a loop. That causes chaos and madness. So just one loop at a time for your collection variables. Okay, so then we're going to grab the collection variable we have for sample request products. And again, this is the one that Salesforce automatically created for me. If you're doing specific data manipulation within your flow, you might want to actually control what direction it goes in. I don't think I've ever actually used that. So in this case, we'll just leave it as it is. And then we need to create a loop variable. So the loop variable really just defines what we're going to call the individual item we're updating within our loop or changing values on. playing with. So in this case, we actually need to create a new resource. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to call it that. And then we will say that the type is a record, so we know that it's an individual record. And our object is sample request product. Since we're only using this in the loop, we don't need to worry about it being available inside, or, well, we don't need to worry about it being passed into or out of the flow. And it's just a single record, so we don't want it to be a collection. So we'll click done, and we'll click done again. And then we will do an assignment. So first we're going to connect our loop here. Okay, so we'll drag over an assignment. And we're going to assign our values. So we'll call this assign source sample, oops, product to new sample request product. Should probably put values in here. Okay, so assignments, I will say, are a bit confusing because you want to put the empty value on the left side, and then on the right side you want to populate, like, that's the value that I want to copy. It usually takes me a minute, and I inevitably flip-flop them the first time. So in this case, we are going to create another record variable because we need to separate out those existing records that have that ID associated. And we need to copy them over to a new record variable without an ID associated, like we talked about earlier. So we will create, actually, just paste the same thing. Oops, wrong thing. Okay, well, here, we'll just type it out. And again, our data type is a record. And we are looking for sample request products. And we're just going to use it inside this flow, and we just need the one. Okay, so now that I've created that variable, I actually need to go pick the field that I want to assign. So pick product first, and then we'll grab it. And we will grab product. Come on. No, it doesn't want to search for me. Okay. And then we will do new sample request, quantity. And then the last thing we need to do is make sure we assign the sample request of our, or yes, the sample request ID of our newly created record. So we will grab that variable where we stored that ID. And Terry, I know I mentioned yesterday that you can sometimes add things to a collection in the assignment, but with this flow, it didn't want to work. So it's worked for me before. So I don't know why, but it didn't want to work this time. So we will go ahead and add second assignment. And we'll say new product collection. Oops, that's not a very good use of camel case there, is it? All right, so this will add the single record to collection. Okay, so again, the new thing is on the left. So we need to create a new resource that will be a collection variable to hold all of these new sample request product records we're creating. So we'll create a variable, and we will it as object collection, sample. We'll say this is a record. And this time we are going to check the box to allow multiple values because we want to hold multiple sample products. We'll click done. All right. So because we're adding something to a collection, we just need to do add. Sometimes you can do add it first if you're more comfortable adding something in a specific order. But in this instance, we can just do add. And we will grab our new record. Click done. And we're going to go from, oops, one assignment to the next assignment. And then, it's not my day. Okay. In the dot this time. And then we'll go back to our loop. So with a loop, you're always creating a literal loop because you're going to go for each item. We're going to follow this path. And then after the last step, we're going to go back into the loop. And then we are going to do a create records. And grab my label here. Okay, and we'll say create new. So this time we're actually going to do the opposite of what we did the last time we used the create records. And we're going to say we're going to create multiple records. And when you're creating multiple records, it has to be a record collection variable. You don't have any other choice. So we're going to grab that record collection variable we created and we'll click done. So now when I actually pull out of the loop, I'm going to get a add after last item label there. Okay. So we're almost done, but not quite. So I talked about one of my best practices is to always have a fault screen. I should have also said have a success screen too. That's a lot easier for your users to understand when they know that everything worked out the way it was supposed to. So we will just create a screen. I'm going to go down here and grab some display text. And we'll just say this is text success message. So I like to put a nice little header in. So we'll say it says success. Actually, I'll make my new line. And then up here, we'll make it bold. We'll throw it in the middle. If you wanted to add confetti, you could do that now, but I don't add confetti. All right. So then we'll type out our success message. So we'll say a new sample request record created. And it's usually, especially when you are doing something like cloning a record, it's a good idea to give an easy way for your users to get to it. So we are going to say, click here, go to the new, and then we'll make click here hyperlink. And because we're just doing something inside of Salesforce, we can actually just paste that in. I should actually show how I did that. So the way to get the ID is to just go up here, grab the resource we want. Oh, I didn't grab it. It doesn't want to appreciate my clicking. There we go. Okay, so this will give us the mail merge tags we need, so we can grab that and then put it in our link. So it's already there, but we would just paste it in there so it has the brackets that'll correctly pull everything in. And then that will automatically take them to the record when they click on it. So we'll click done. Actually going to pull this down a little bit more so we can get a straight line. Okay, so the other important thing is to always have a fault message. So that's something that your users will see when something doesn't happen the way it's supposed to. So we'll call this fault. And we will add some more display text. All right, so we might say, uh-oh, something went wrong. Your Salesforce administration team urgent matter, please reach out to your so something simple, because you want it to make sense to your users, and I promise they're gonna have no idea what the fault, like the flow fault message means, because it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. We as admins can usually interpret it, but I promise your users can't, and they'll just get really confused. So you're always better off having something that makes sense to them, especially letting them know that you already know what happened. And that way they don't bother you about it. So, and you can see if they're doing something multiple times and doing it wrong. So, all right, so we'll leave that. And the way we link to our fault message is we drag down after we've already connected it to something. So the solid gray line is essentially success, and then our dashed red line is we failed. And we want to do that for every one of these little pink squares. Because we shouldn't have any fault issues over here, but we generally, just the general rule is if we are doing something that's querying the database, manipulating the database, that's where we're going to have some errors potentially. So we're going to do our fault screen there for all of those. Usually we try to drag it kind of off so it's very clearly kind of by itself, especially if you have a big complex flow. You want to put it way in the corner so it's by itself, okay? And then we will do save. So I talked about having concise labels that make sense. So for this one, I would probably say sample request pipe clone. If you use Jira, I also recommend putting the Jira ticket number in your description. But in this case, we'll just say clone sample request. And then if I need to come in and make changes to it, I could do that. All right, so we'll click save. Let's see, I have a few minutes. So we will do debug. And this basically just simulates clicking the button. So I'll go over here. I will grab my record ID. I will drop it in here. The important thing to remember with debugging, while it feels like it's fake, it is actually not. So if your flow actually commits changes to the database, those changes are going to be committed. And we'll actually see that when we do this, and we'll make sure our flow worked. So we only had 2 screens in this flow, so that's all I'm going to see over here. But on the right side, I can actually see what happened as my flow did its thing. So if you have a multiple step flow with multiple screens, you'll see this panel continually update as you click through your screens. Otherwise, it's just, like it did here, it's just going to show everything at once as it went through each of those elements. So, and like I said, when the fault message comes through, it's actually this same text, and it will just tell you when it caught an error. So that's the kind of stuff you see when you get the fault message. Okay, so we know that it worked because it's telling us that we went to the success screen. So if we actually go over here to our sample requests tab, we have this new record that was created by us going through that debugging process. So now that we've done that, oh, I have the little thingy in my way. We'll move this over. Okay. So before we can actually use this in our instance, we do need to click the activate button. Once you've activated a flow, you cannot make any changes. You do have to make the change. So if I wanted to change the text, let's say on my success screen, instead of success, I want this to say yay. All right. So now it says yay. We'll click done. But I now have to do save as. I can't overwrite that record or that version that I already had. So when you do save as, you have the option to create it as a new version of the flow or a brand new flow. Most of the time, you're just going to create a new version because you're making changes to the process that already exists. Sometimes you'll do a new flow when you just want to mimic a process you've built on one object that works really well. Sometimes it's easier to just create a new flow that follows that same process and just change your objects. So in this case, we're going to do a new version, and we're going to say text changed on success screen. And then we'll click save. And then we'll go ahead and activate this new version. Now, if I go over here to my list of flows, that flow is right down here. And if I go over here and click view details and versions, I can see those two versions I made, as well as that description field. So I find it easiest to always put the changes you make in the description. Again, if you're using Jira, always, or any other sort of ticketing tool, put the ticket number in here so you always have a way to reference that. Okay. So then the last thing we need to do is actually attach this flow to a button on our sample requests. So I'm going to cheat and go over here to sample requests. I'm going to go to edit object. And we will create a new button. Do a new action. And we're going to launch a flow. And we want the sample request clone. So we will, so that we know this isn't the same one as the button that's already there, we'll just call this clone record for now. But again, you want the label to always be something that's going to make sense to your users. If you have cloning a lot in your instance, it may make sense to just call it clone if they're used to seeing clone already. So we'll click save. Okay, now we need to add that to the page. It would be great if they would update Lightning so that it worked in all the administration pages, but it doesn't. All right, so we'll update our page layout. And we want to go to mobile and Lightning actions. Oh no, we have multiple clones. Okay, so that's the standard button. And this one is the one I just created. So we'll put it right next to our existing clone button. We'll click save. Go in here to sample request number 12, give it a refresh. So we have our beautiful new button. And now the moment of truth, we'll see if everything worked the way it was supposed to. We'll click clone. And we'll go ahead and click this. Did it all work? And it did. All right, so we have successfully cloned a parent record and its children records. Are there any questions?
If you are talking, feel free to unmute yourself.
I have a question for you, Carissa.
Yeah.
If it's still a Salesforce limitation that you cannot have an auto-launched flow like with user input on the screens, like for example, like let's say you had a checkbox on your sample request, and as soon as that checkbox was checked, you would go ahead and clone it and then show a success screen or something. Is that still a limit?
I believe so, just because auto-launched flows in general are assumed they won't have any user input. That being said, you could manipulate your flow such that it would, instead of showing that success message, it would redirect them to the new record. And I think that will be covered in the later flow session using a Lightning component. So you wouldn't have the success message, but you could put them on the newly created record when they check the box. If you didn't want, it to be done with a button, but instead with a checkbox.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the shy type and don't want to speak, you can always chat your message or your question as well. if we need to jump back to the flow and talk through a piece that maybe you didn't understand, we can certainly do that too. We've got a few minutes here, so. Or if you have questions related to flow that maybe is a flow that you've been working on that you're struggling with, now is also a good time to maybe ask those, any kind of flow related question, whether it's related to this one that we just built or one maybe you're working on. We are such a talkative group. You've got an expert here in front of you with so it's a good time to hit her with something hard.
Yes, please challenge me. Teach me something new today.
All right. Going once, twice, and okay, we're done. Oh, there it is. There's one in the chat.
Oh,
Is there a place we can go to access the recording, past recordings? Yes. Brittany, we will have this posted on my YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the success community so that you'll be able to get to it. All right, very good. Well, let me share my screen again, and let's continue on. All right, I do want to remind you that we do have our next quarterly user group meeting that will be May 12th. This is one where Chick Herbert is going to be presenting to us. Highly encourage you to make this particular session. This will be virtual now, so if you didn't see the messages that I had sent out in the community earlier, we are moving our user groups to virtual, just for your own protection and safety. We want that really above all, is for everybody to remain safe. And so Chick is going to talk to us specifically about building your reputation, your personal brand. Chick is also an author of the book here that you see on the screen. It's a nice quick read if you're interested and you like this kind of a topic. You can find it out on Amazon. Very easily to find that book as well. So encourage your friends to come and join this one. It is not necessarily a Salesforce topic as much as it is a personal growth topic. So do encourage people to show up. I think it's going to be a really exciting user group meeting. So I hope to see everybody there for that. So do sign up for that. Also, beginning May 12th, Carla and I have pushed this study group out a little over a month and a half. We were going to start it this month, I guess. And we have decided to push that back. It was just a little bit chaotic with everything going on in the world right now. So if you want to participate in the Platform App Builder Certification Study Group, it's supposed to be a short form URL, but that looks kind of ugly and nasty to me. But anyway, I will post this also in our community so that you can register for this. This certification does not require you to have your admin certification first. So this is an entry certification. So if you're not a certified admin, but you're still interested in this one, you absolutely can join the group. You can get certified with this particular one without your admin cert. You don't have to get the certification. If you just want to join to learn and to participate with everybody, there is no requirement. We're not going to slap your hands if you choose not to take the exam. We really just want to help people improve their Salesforce skills. One thing that we are going to do differently with this one than we did with the admin group is we are going to include some other user groups. So we are going to include the Kansas City, Omaha, Cedar Rapids user groups. So we're hoping to bring in a little bit larger group of people. What that does is that just means you don't have to present quite as frequently. Probably will last 12 to 13 weeks, similar to to the last one that we did, and we will meet every week. So if you're interested in that, please sign up, and we would just love to have you participate in another study group with us. And then finally, thank you very much for joining today. I hope that it's been helpful. Again, if you have questions on this topic or any other topic, feel free to post those out in our Trailblazer community site. Carla and I know, watch those very, very closely, and we'll get an answer to you as best we can. There's a lot of people in our community. I was noticing, I was looking at some of the other communities, and their numbers are fairly small, and we've got about 500 some people that are looking at those questions. So feel free to post out there, and hopefully you'll get a good response from those in the area. So with that, thank you very, very much. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks,
Thank
Terry.
you so much.
You're very welcome.